Welcome to the Sport Media and Tech Podcast. My name is Keel Blake. On this episode, Dr. Jeff Porter and I speak with Andres Cardenas, Chief Marketing Officer of Minute Media, and Sean Conboy, editor of the Players Tribune. We discuss what makes a story compelling, who are some of the best storytellers, and in today's world, how are those stories shared?
So mine was very much sports focused. As long as I can remember, I knew it had to be something in sports. I was a frustrated athlete. Was never able to make it big. Played a little bit of soccer in college, and that's as far as I got in my pro sports career. So I was committed to work in the sports sector and started my career in the Olympic movement. So worked from the IOC and started working my way around. Worked in Rio for the Olympic Games, and I decided to jump into the agency world and sponsorship marketing, and that's when the whole media world started taking off. Right, social media rights became ridiculous, and it seemed like the right move, and that's when I made, I call it the move to the dark side, and I joined DAZN, and from DAZN I made a leap into this back then unknown tech Israeli sports content startup called Minute Media, and the rest was history. So yeah, but look, my beginning was fueled by my passion for sport, and that's what sort of guided me all the way till today. And I try to remember that kid and why I do it. And I don't think I'll ever work in anything else that is not related to sport until the day I retire.
Yeah, for me, I think a pretty similar story. Grew up an athlete playing ice hockey. Was never quite big or fast enough to really ever make it, and kind of knew it. But I always had such a passion for sports. My parents said that I learned to read off the back of reading statistics and stuff off the back of hockey cards. It used to have that little box, like a little fun fact box on the back of the Topps cards back in the day in the late 80s, early 90s. And so I somehow just, taught myself how to read doing that. So, and then, I went to college, and I, like a lot of people, I think wasn't fully sure what I wanted to do. But I had something called a blog back then, which now has become irrelevant. Back in the day, it was, in the, let's say, 2006, 2007 golden era of blogs, was just something I was doing from my apartment in college to make my friends laugh. And, like a lot of blogs back then, vaguely had to do with sports, but was just sort of pretty casual. And it ended up getting pretty popular. And then long story short, Pittsburgh Magazine, Pittsburgh's where I'm from, huge sports town, Pittsburgh Magazine saw it and said, hey, do you want to come on here and be our sports editor? And we'll kind of, take the blog and start publishing it on here. And it was a dream come true for me. I started doing that, interviewing athletes, Penguins, Steelers, Pirates for, profiles. I could sense that, I thought they were pretty good, and I started to get pretty good at it. But then, you could sense that I would get the athlete comfortable and I would get some pretty good anecdotes from my story, right? But there was like a limit, they would kind of stop. And then when the recorder went off or the camera went off, we would keep talking, and they would kind of keep telling me some of these stories, but they were just like 20% better than what I had gotten when my recorder was on. And I'm sure this is a common thing that a lot of people can relate to. And it wasn't that, it was nothing other than the fact that when someone sees a recorder or a camera on, they're a little tighter, they're not as natural and loose as they're going to be if they know that, hey, we're off the record here, we're just talking, right? And, it was something that I had in the back of my head for a long time, actually. And then, to make a really long story short, I started doing investigative reporting for Wired magazine, of all things, on concussions during the time when, 2011, 2012, when there was a lot going on there with, especially the science behind concussions and everything that was happening. And right around that time. And, even then, I could, in speaking to the athletes, they would tell me some horrific stories, some of them, right? Some of them were really suffering and, really bad things going on later in life, even when they were young. dealing with post-concussion syndrome and things like that. But then I would still, you'd talk to them off the record and you'd get even more, but they were a little tentative to really fully go there because, there's legal stuff with that. There's all kinds of pressure from former teammates in the NFL. There's a lot going on there, right? And so with that in the back of my mind, then someone had reached out to me, former editor that I had worked with, about this thing that they couldn't really tell me about called the Players Tribune. So I sort of met some of the early people at a bar in New York City, and it's like a CIA operation. They told me about this thing that Derek Jeter wanted to launch that, we couldn't, no one could talk about yet. And yeah, the idea was so similar to what I had in the back of my head, which is the idea was just, hey, athletes have all these stories to tell, but they feel they're a little bit hesitant to kind of tell them to a reporter on the record, not because they don't trust the press. There's some amazing people in the press, as we all know, but some of these stories are so sensitive and so personal that they just want to tell it in their own way. And I thought, it was kind of a genius idea at the time, which 7 years ago, the world was a lot different than it is now. And to make a very long story short, it's amazing, I think, what we've been able to do in the stories we've been able to tell in those 7 years.
So Andreas, back to you, sir. I'm interested to know, based on, using Sean's statement or as an anecdote, comments as an anecdote, let's talk about the founding story of Minute Media.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like many startups, we're not a startup anymore, but if you see some of the companies that did well and grown and everything, they pivoted a lot. And our story is not different. We started born in Israel in 2011. So this year's our 10th year anniversary, actually, with the ambition to become a global soccer, okay? Football here in England, soccer in the States. I'll call it soccer in this conversation, all right?
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of college football season, so.
Yeah. I better make that clear. So yeah, it was a dream of becoming the largest digital soccer community in the world, powered by its own publishing technology. So Asaf, our founder, had the vision that by building our own publishing technology, we would be in a position to expand globally, build these communities, and become a powerhouse. And this is out of Israel that has no soccer at all, right? And so it was an ambitious plan, and the platform was built, and the digital soccer brand was started, which today is named 90 Min, and it grew and it succeeded much faster than I think we had ever expected. And a lot of it was due to our technology platform. We produced content in a more scalable way. We distributed it in a more efficient way. We were integrated to all the social platforms and distribution platforms into influencers in a much more effective way. So that's when we thought, well, look, there's something here with our technology. Let's keep on building and improving it. And that's when we began to see that we can also share this technology and build this open platform in which we can help other content brands or even creators build a business out of their content operation through our platform. So we're today, if you fast forward today, we are an enabler for digital content businesses and creators to grow their audiences, to grow their content, to scale their content, and most importantly, to make money off the back of that so they can continue to grow. And the only way that was possible was by powering our own content brands. So after 90 Min in soccer came Double Tap in esports. And after Double Tap, we created a US-centric US sports brand, which then morphed in what today is Fansided, because we acquired Fansided about 2 years ago. And now we have 6 content brands, including the Players Tribune, that sit and are powered by our platform, which makes them more efficient. But we have a whole other business that we share our technology with other publishers, and so they can grow their businesses, they can grow their monetization, implement monetization tools, grow their engagement, and just take advantage of the benefits that we've built for us. So yeah, it started out, hey, let's be a football digital community worldwide that's powered by our tech. And we're sitting today with this huge global company that's a business enablement platform for publishers, digital content businesses, and creators as well.
And Sean, could you elaborate a little bit? You mentioned a little bit about the founding of Players Tribune through your journey, but tell us a little more about Derek Jeter's vision and how that group was formed, and how it's evolved to where it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty interesting story, actually, because I think, I'll be honest, right? I think Derek said this many times, right? I think Derek Jeter starting this company was not something that a lot of people had on the books, right? If you know anything about Derek, he was always very reserved, very private throughout his career. Obviously an absolute legend, one of the most respected people in sports. And I think that when he announced this idea of, hey, I'm Derek Jeter's building a media company, a sports media company, a lot of people said, why would he be doing that? What is this going to be? Is this a rival to like ESPN or something like that? And actually it had nothing to do with being a rival to traditional media at all. His vision, just from his own experience and why he was so private, right, is that, and even just what he saw from other teammates and stuff over the years, is that, there's some stories that are very appropriate for traditional media, ESPN, the local reporters, Bleacher Report, whatever it may be, right? And those are, we all know those, we read them every day, we all love them. But there's kind of this other lane of storytelling, which, a lot of players would say, oh, well, I'm saving that for my book, right? Some of the best stuff in their life. And then what happens, right? Books take a really long time to make. They sometimes take years to get published. Sometimes guys or, women never get around to writing that book. And so the idea was, stuff is happening so fast now, right? And, these athletes kind of feel like, in the age of social media, which back then, by the way, and, you have to remember in 2014, when we launched, how different Twitter was, right, than it is now, how different Instagram was. I mean, even how different YouTube was, right? YouTube was looked at this thing, it was like very short form, kind of like funny videos, or just these, and, now it's a platform for, hosting documentaries and even films. And so, the world was very different. But his vision was, okay, there's kind of a medium path here, right, between speaking to maybe the local reporter and giving a couple quotes, and then that's all people get from you, and then writing a book or making a documentary down the line. And the middle path was basically the Players Tribune, which is, the vision was, what if athletes could sit with a trusted team and just talk about their life, their story, off the record, knowing that, in a way, there was no pressure to even publish something potentially, but we are going to work together to create something really, really meaningful and interesting, whether that's something serious, something funny, something that just explains them to the world a little bit more. That was the basic vision. And to Derek's credit, he really, he was retiring at the time. This is kind of his next project after he was retiring. And he really left it, one, to build a great team, the original team that was hired, some of the best people I've ever met, just really compassionate and thoughtful people. But, two, he also let us take that blank page approach and then go to the athletes and let the athletes dictate what kind of stories we were going to tell. So when people ask me now, oh man, you guys did all this pioneering in like mental health, social justice, all these topics, like, wow, tell us about how you thought to do that. I always say that we didn't sit around and say, we're going to break through on concussions, mental health, depression. Like, the athletes did that for us. We sat with them. We said, what's on your mind? What do you think about that you don't talk to the press about? What do you talk to your best friends about, but you don't really tell the fans about? And so many of those topics came up. And over the years, it wasn't an overnight thing, but we've slowly built that trust where one athlete goes a little bit out on the ledge, then the next athlete goes a little bit further. And now you're to the point where, you read these stories sometimes, and I have to pinch myself that athletes are being this raw and this specific about some of the things that they deal with. And that's pretty much the vision in a nutshell. I think it was, And one thing I would say about that, I would also say it wasn't just us, right? I think at that time, several other companies saw that there was maybe an empathy gap between the way sports was being covered on, let's say, when you tuned into your local news or like even ESPN, and what was really going on in the lives of athletes. And I think we were trying to kind of bridge that empathy gap for people.
Yeah, you both clearly are storytellers, and we were very excited about this because, what is it that makes a story compelling? Is there a formula? Is there, just an equation or certain ingredients that help make certain stories stronger than others? Earlier, Sean, you referenced, you heard when you were listening to people on recordings, they were a little more tight. And then Andres, you mentioned just distribution and the technology that powers the viscosity of sharing stories and making people pass them along. So what is the mix that really creates that compelling story?
Yeah, look, Sean is the master storyteller, right? He probably has his view, but I do think it putting technology aside, it does start with a story, right? And a good story, and we've seen it. Sean can share. Good story doesn't mean it's going to fly, right? There's various other elements that need to support that in terms of timing, right? Which is relevant, and if it's reactive, how we distribute it to what audience, right? The format it's presented in. So there's so many variables, and I don't think, we have not found a secret ingredient that if you hit each one, it's a success. It's a success. It's not. There's pieces, not only the Players Tribune, but in our other brands that have taken off that we'd never expect them to take them off, and some that have not when we thought it was a guarantee. So yeah, I mean, what technology and our technology can help is how those stories are not necessarily told, but in the different formats and how they're distributed and when they're distributed and how far they can go. But it's really the essence of the story, and I think that's what makes the Players Tribune so special, but at the same time so challenging. I'm sure Sean can elaborate, and then we never know what the actual story we're going to get and what the best format it is and the timing in order to release that. So I think technology helps and enables it, but it's still the story that is the driver, in my opinion. And it's not only the Players Tribune, but it's on 90 Minutes, on Fansided, Mental Floss, all our content operations. And we have some very, very talented storytellers on all the teams. But when I'm looking at the Players Tribune specifically, it's very unique in that, or other content brands, there are creators that are telling stories that are happening, they're reactive to sport or to entertainment. When it comes to the Players Tribune, it's not Sean telling a story, it's Sean helping an athlete tell their story. And sometimes those stories are very deep and delicate and powerful. And I think that's probably the most challenging thing. And when we saw the Players Tribune was able to do that, to really share that voice, but in a meaningful way. And it's not an easy thing to do. And we've had to adapt as a company, as Minute Media, had to adapt to the Players Tribune because it's not based on a calendar. So we're saying, okay, there's this piece, we're going to distribute it on this date to these audiences and everything through our technology. And we had Sean come and saying, well, it doesn't exactly work like that because we need the approval. We need to sign off the athlete. Athlete's getting cold feet. Yeah, but we need to, because Super Bowl's next week. Well, that's not the way it works, right? That's not the way it works. So it's changed a little bit of the culture and the mindset of Minute Media to adapt to a storytelling operation that was completely different than what we have been used to, which was much more news-driven, reactive, that we had, I'm not going to say total control on, but a lot. When you're looking at the Players Tribune, the control lies with the athletes. The trust is with the athletes, right? And we have to adapt and be reactive to that, and make sure that we have what it takes in place to make these stories fly. And it has been a really good learning experience. It's been almost 2 years now, and we've come a long way. But I think I think we're in a good spot, and 2022 looks promising.
You know, I want to just follow up on that. You know, we talk a lot about proactive versus reactive media. We talk about the overhead of scheduling to participate within media cycles, but then you have to be nimble enough to then be able to jump in based on what's happening in current relevant events. So, you know, Sean, what are the emotions or what are the, you know, aspects of storytelling that just captivate people?
On that note specifically, which I think is a really interesting topic is for us, and especially for students, you know, just on the news cycle thing, because this is the thing, you talk to young people now. And when I was coming up, I thought a lot about the news cycle for sure, but the way that young people are in tune with the pace of things now, and how I would almost say there's an anxiety about keeping up with everything, keeping up with the news cycle, getting your personal brand out there. I mean, you know, I had to retrain myself, right? When we started doing this thing, coming from a traditional media background, you know, patience is something that is a key here at TPT in general. But I'll give you a perfect example, right, of our place in the news cycle. I'm sure you guys saw this, but just the other day in the NHL, in the hockey world, there was a tragic death. There was a player, Jimmy Hayes. He died very young, suddenly. The people kind of felt like, you know, if the autopsy comes out, it's probably going to reveal, you know, something drug related, unfortunately, right? We've had these deaths in the hockey world. The family, thank God, was brave enough to publicly release the autopsy. He had fentanyl in his system when he died, right? It was an accidental overdose, thought he was taking cocaine. There was fentanyl in the cocaine, which is you know, we've been down this road now so many times, right? This was a young guy with kids. He played for the Boston Bruins. He was, you know, we as the Players Tribune, we've even talked to to Jimmy before his passing over the years. We've talked to friends of his, but we have to ask ourselves a hard question, right? What is our place in this? The emotions are very raw. That, you know, how do we want to try to get some sort of a piece as a tribute to him? I mean, what do we do, right? And thankfully, you know, and often what you do is you have patience and you wait and you put some little feelers out. And what ended up happening is Colin Wilson, a player who was kind of a cult hero for the Nashville Predators, went to the Stanley Cup Finals over the years. He reached out to us. We had worked with him before on a separate story and said, hey, I want to use Jimmy's death to talk about my addiction that I had over the years that I hid. And, you know, this piece came out the other day, made waves in the hockey community for how honest he was about everything. And, you know, I think we call it the extended universe often of the Players Tribune, right? This community, this world that we exist in. And I think that was the perfect piece for us to do after this tragedy had occurred, because hopefully, you know, the point of the piece is we can hopefully help some people, right? Not just athletes, but maybe the average person who reads this piece who kind of thinks, wow, you know, I'm kind of developing these same patterns, doing these same things, right? And maybe I need to get some help. Maybe I need to look a little bit harder at what I'm doing. And so often that is kind of our place in the quote unquote news cycle. If we're not the ones breaking the news and making the news, right, we try to sit back and analyze what's going on in the sports world and see if there's a place for us to kind of add to the conversation. Storytelling. I'll try to keep it short. I'll give you a one-word answer actually for what makes a good story. And then I can give you more of that, but in one word, I think it's specificity. And I think people should really marinate on that, because I think if they think of what they love, whether it's music, whether it's a book, whether it's a documentary, specificity is the thing, right? It is, I'm sure the students can look this up, type Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse-Five author on YouTube, type Kurt Vonnegut storytelling. A famous clip will come up of him teaching a class where he explains there's only been 3 types of stories ever in the world. In the history of the world, there's 3 stories. They all follow the same patterns. You're never going to invent a new breakthrough type of story. There's a reason we've had thousands of years of oral storytelling, and then it turned to books. Like, you're never going to break the mold and do something different. Every story is either, the hero's journey, rising, little setback, rise again. I mean, there's 2 other ones, but for the purposes of this example, a lot of athlete stories in the broad strokes are quite similar. What makes our stories, or any story, special, especially in first person, where it's literally, if you think about it, the image in my head of these things is it's the athlete grabbing a microphone and talking to you, telling you a story. It's unbroken. It's fully them the whole way, right? Well, like anything, like a great stand-up set, like a great, musician, you need specificity of tone, of voice. You need to captivate people and really take them there, right? The most common thing, if you look at the conversations I have with athletes, if you looked, the most common phrase I'm going to use, I probably use it 400 times in every discussion, is, well, paint a picture of that for me. Paint a picture, paint the picture, paint. I mean, I'm probably driving people crazy, but in other words, wait, go back, hold on. So, because right now, I see, even me, right? This is my first take. I didn't know that question was coming. I'm telling you about storytelling. I'm on my first take. Now, if I could pause, and we recorded this 10 times, every single time that I tell that story, I'm going to be quicker, more efficient, more vivid in the way that I'm answering this, right? Same thing with an athlete answer, because especially with us, right? It's a conversation, it's off the record conversation. We're not sending them the questions ahead of time. It's not canned. They're just kind of talking like they talk to a friend. So, and that's amazing, right? But for the purposes of storytelling, what you want is for them to pause, rewind, hold on, take me back to the locker room. What did he say? What color was the car? What song were you listening to? Because for readers, and it's an important part of the equation, right? We have athletes, which is the most important thing for the Players Tribune. But hey, we want people to love this stuff and share it and enjoy it, right? So we have the readers as well. And for the readers, the illusion that we want is that they're like a fly on the wall. When they're reading this, the really good ones, it almost feels like I'm not supposed to be reading this. This is almost too, like, did they mistakenly publish this? Like, wow. Like, I almost feel like I'm behind the scenes and this athlete is kind of saying this to their friend or something, right? And that's in everything from the tone, the language, everything that is being used. We don't want it to read like an op-ed, right? We don't, and with all respect to the New York Times or, Wall Street Journal, I mean, they've been publishing op-eds from athletes for longer than we've ever existed, for so long. I think like Babe Ruth used to write a column or whatever in a newspaper back in the day, right? But that's a specific kind of thing, and it reads a specific kind of way. And when you read a Players Tribune thing, we want it to pop. Like we want you to be a little bit off guard, not really know where it's going. And that is all down to specificity and detail. And, by the way, we don't always get there, right? And I tell people this all the time. We're trying to do a very hard thing, right? We have very busy athletes who, don't have a ton of time, who have a lot to lose. Like, there's people around them. Like, we are all very transparent about this, right? What we're shooting for, though, is, and I think you will, see it in some of our most read pieces, is almost a danger, almost the athlete really going maybe a little further than you would expect them to go on some of these topics. And I think they get it now, and the people around them understand that when you do that, there's a deep appreciation from people that you're kind of, maybe not supposed to be going that far, but you are going that far. And in the mental health space, I think that's why we've been so successful. These athletes aren't just saying, hey, I am struggling with depression and I need some space and, thank you. They're saying, here's what depression feels like. Here's my worst day. Here's when it's taking you all the way in there so that you understand what they mean by that. And yeah, and the only other thing I would say, you know, especially if you have students watching this, you know, and I have to remind myself every day almost, is who are we writing this for? Like, if you can imagine a person in your head, actually, right, when you're doing anything, and asking yourself, am I entertaining this person at every moment when I'm rereading this draft or listening to this podcast or watching this video? Do I think their attention is going to dip? Do I think I'm sustaining their attention? And that's like a thing that's maybe not so obvious to people, because, you know, George Saunders is a writer I really admire. And, you know, one of the things he said a long time ago that I heard that really stuck with me is, you know, we kind of lie to students when we teach them, you know, when they're in their English class. We say, like, you're in control, you know, you're the artist and the author. And he's like, listen, this is entertainment. What we're doing here is we're entertaining. Even the most serious book, Dostoevsky, it's entertainment, it's a product. And so it's actually your responsibility to keep people's attention and to keep them entertained, which I think was a kind of a revelatory thing for me at the time when I heard him say that, because you don't often hear that a lot in a classroom setting.
Yeah, what I would add to that real quick, and from a personal experience, an anecdote, as I began working with the Players Tribune more and more and closer with Sean, and for us was really this learning, what does the Players Tribune mean and what goes into the storytelling, right? And it's very hard to explain, right? It took us months and months but to Sean's point on the specificity, but also on the tone and everything. One night when I was going to bed, I put the kids to bed. I was going to bed, and we had just released a Cordell Stewart piece, right? And lights were off. My wife was falling asleep. I read it on my phone. I read it, and that's I think the first time I really understood what we're doing. I mean, I'm not a Steelers fan. I remember vaguely Cordell Stewart, but I think it was just connecting with the story. It could have been any athlete. It could have actually been any person. It's just connecting to that story. And I feel that I connected to that story, not only because of the story, but exactly on how it was told, right? It was told in a language that's exactly what Sean said. I felt that I was in his living room, hiding behind a sofa. And when Sean and Cordell Stewart were having this heart to heart, and that's what it's about, right? All of a sudden it becomes intimate. It becomes almost the experiences between you and the athlete. And that's, you know, when you're talking about the right ingredients, I think when we're able to connect with a fan or any other reader, that fan feels that the athlete is speaking to him and he's the only listener, that's when the magic happens. And in the Cordell, and I would recommend anybody listening to here or you guys to go and read that Cordell Stewart piece, because it's impactful. Read it at night when you're going to bed with the lights off. Yeah.
You guys dropped some amazing gems, and there's just so much content, so many things I really want to talk about. But I'll kind of shift the conversation a little bit, because I love storytelling, and there's no debate for me that Disney is one of the best storytellers that I've ever seen, and they've done an amazing job at it from everything they've ever put out. In your experience, who has been the best storyteller? Somebody that you've read or interviewed or had a conversation with that you're like, man, that is a great story. Like, who was the person that after you're done, you went back and said, I want more of this person because they were just that good? Who has that been for you all?
Personal work, anything?
Well,
I'm a big fan.
In this environment, yeah, who has it been? Like, who's the person that you want to go to, Andreas, and say, hey, I want to get you back because we left on a cliffhanger, and I want more of that content. I want more of that story. It's like a John Wick movie, and you're like, well, I need more. Show me what happens next.
Oh, that's a hard look. In this is going to sound very, very staged. But I mean this in honesty. And obviously I could go the Coen brothers, Hemingway. I mean, I have a whole list. But if we get to this world, and I know I'm gonna make them blush, but the stuff that comes out from Sean, and I would say there's another from Sam Donsky in the Players Tribune. And I know he's this, but it is.
He's covering his camera right now.
But it is, and I know he's gonna get embarrassed, but and the reason is he's been doing it nonstop for 7 years, right? Trying to get it right. And that's why when we're talking about the Players Tribune, if you ask him, he probably believes he still hasn't gotten it perfectly right? And that's, I think, the mentality and the culture within the writers and the creators at the Players Tribune. It's that almost unattainable perfection that they just strive and were relentless to reach. So I know I'm putting him on the spot, making him blush and embarrassed. But yeah, if it's not Hemingway, if it's not the Coen brothers, I would say yeah, it's Sean Conboy and his team.
But I want to repeat something you said. Great storytellers aren't born overnight. They practice and learn and at their craft. So Sean, who inspired you to become a great storyteller?
That's fine. I didn't know that question was coming. It gave me goosebumps a little bit. My grandfather, honestly, my grandfather he could have been in The Sopranos or The Goodfellas or something, old school Italian guy, working class guy from Pittsburgh. He was an amazing, he barely graduated high school, to be honest, was not a great reader, probably never read a full book in his life. He was, a contractor, worked with his hands. He was an amazing oral storyteller, right? So if you would go over there, he would just make up stories. So to your point, it's so funny, Jeff mentioning Disney, right? Like, you're so right, because Disney, what they get so right is you can be 90 years old or 9 years old, and those stories pull you in, and you can cry or laugh if you're 9 or 90. He had a similar gift, and any great storyteller does, right? He would start telling a story about a mouse named Nunzio who, was hungry and looking for cheese. And you're like, it was ridiculous, but he'd pull you in. And again, it was specificity. It was, it was unique, right? So my grandfather was an amazing storyteller, and I've never even really in my head connected that thought until you just said that. And I think he's a big inspiration. But, for me also, I think, I mentioned George Saunders, and I tell this to people all the time. I'm not sure, he's become quite famous now. He's a short story writer, actually, which is very unique in this time. And I actually recommend it, especially to students, because look, if you don't want to, if you're a bit like I was, right, when I was in college, Dostoevsky, okay, I'm trying to, go drink beer tonight. I wasn't that focused actually on the classics. I think this is actually quite common of a lot of people, even if they're interested in writing, it can be quite hard, especially in your, early 20s to a lot of people pretend they've read these books, and and so my thing, if you're like that, and even if you're not, or if you're lying to yourself, George Saunders, read one of his short stories. They're short, they're funny, they will make you laugh, they'll move you deeply. They don't fit into one box, which I think is so important in storytelling. Tell people all the time. People say, and I get it, they'll say, oh, the Players Tribune, oh man, you guys do those serious stories all the time, these heavy stories. And that's true. But what I would say is, if you read those stories often, hopefully we're actually within those stories going to make you laugh one time. We're going to make you, smile. We're going to make you, the tone hopefully shifts around a little bit, which I think is really, really important. And I think Saunders is very hard to explain unless you've read one of his short stories, but I think that's what he is a master of, is kind of keeping you on your toes in that way. And so, yeah, that's a pretty big inspiration for me, I would say. What else? That's a hard question to answer, honestly, but yeah, Saunders is the first thing that comes to mind.
Well, I'm gonna punt this back over to Keo because he's got a great question for you all. But I definitely want to read in the next Players Tribune about the mouse named what? What's his mouse name?
Nunzio, the mouse.
Nunzio.
He was an Italian American mouse, who I don't know, he lived under the stairs or whatever, in my grandfather's house, and he had a personality, and I think he loved Swiss cheese. He didn't like any other kind of cheese. It was an ongoing epic of his journey to always try to find food. Nunzio.
That sounds like your next book.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I appreciate you sharing that, Sean, because it's intimate. And I think that's what you're talking about. It's being in the room where it happened to steal something from Hamilton, right? But that's where, we've talked about content and, specificity, and we've talked about just what makes a compelling story. But from a distribution standpoint, how is technology disrupting media in this space, and what are some of the tools that your team uses through technology?
Well, I'll tell you how it's disrupting us sometimes, and then how and I don't think it's disrupting but enabling. But with the rise of social media and the movement that everybody's a brand and everybody's a creator, everybody believes they're a storyteller. And look, who am I to say that somebody's a storyteller and somebody's not a storyteller? But I do think that content has become very commoditized, and within this ocean of content, sometimes it's not easy to find the good storytelling and the good stories. So I do think, in a way, that the social platforms and social media have enabled everybody to be a creator. I don't necessarily think it's enabled anybody or allowed anybody or formed everyone into storytellers. So I think the storytelling aspect is still very sacred and very special, but harder and harder to find in this ocean of commoditized content. From a technology standpoint, and us as a media company and content owners, we want to. I think it's more effective if our stories and our content lives where the readers or the fans already are. Right? It's very difficult today for anybody, unless you're a legacy brand, right? And ESPN and New York Times, I think, for you to build a destination, right? And as much as you do want to build a destination, we do have a destination, we also want our content to live, be that on social, be that picked up by other publishers, on audio, on podcast. So pretty much everywhere, right? Harder to control the experience that way, but at least the reach is there and people experience and engage with that content. At Minute Media, through our technology, we have access, integration with all the social platforms, integration with Google, but also hundreds of other publishers in the sports, entertainment, or culture world, in which we can distribute our content, be that written, be that video, be that audio, through it. So all of a sudden, the Players Tribune Cordell Stewart piece that before might have been published on TPT's owned and operated channels, so site, on Instagram, Facebook, and everything, all of a sudden that story can live in 200, 300, 400 other publishers that take it because it's good content. It just can't be crap content, right? Content. And all of a sudden, those touch points are just multiplied. And the chances for somebody to interact, read, enjoy, and really consume in a special way that piece of content is much, much higher. I think that's what our technology brings to the table. So it's not only distributing through social, but it's seeding it through all these other channels, and trying to make it as relevant and to as many audiences as possible.
Guys, so we're running a little bit low on time, but I can't leave you all without asking a question that impacts my world. So this is more of a self-serving question, if you would. Tell me about how NIL, or name, image, and likeness for our audience, is impacting your world and that entire conversation. Because to your point, Andres, everyone else is a brand. Everyone believes they're a storyteller. Now you've got hundreds of thousands, like another 460,000 student athletes out on the platform. Like, hey, here's my story. Like, how does that impact your business? John, that's you.
NIL is interesting because, you know, we were in an interesting place with that one because we actually we've been creating content with high school athletes, with student athletes for some time now, because of purely editorial. A lot had approached us over the years to want to tell their stories. So from a purely editorial storytelling point of view, you know, we were excited about the ruling, but, you know, we felt like not that much was going to change, you know, on our side for the better, really, because, you know, we were already in progress with a couple of student athletes on different mental health stories and things that we were doing. I think from a commercial standpoint, it's very, very interesting, right? But like a lot of things, we mentioned the word patience earlier, right? When it comes to working with athletes and trust, and I think it's a patience thing. I think there's been some really interesting movement in that space, especially with some publishers, you know, really getting involved early on. But look, for us, we're always going to make sure that we do things right and that we're going to do right by the athlete. And so I think that in the commercial space, we just have to be patient and see how these things play out. You know, I think, look, when you're all the time, you know, even if they're professional athletes, when you're dealing with young people as well, you know, you want to be sensitive and make sure that, you know, if you're in a creative partnership with them, that it's really going to work out well and that they're going to, you know, thrive from it in the end. And that's what we're all about. At the end of the day, you know, we will sacrifice growth and page views for the athlete trust. It's a unique thing here. That's the whole proposition to athletes, right? If we were the opposite and we were constantly just trying to grow at all costs and do any deal at all costs, like, great, right? But in the long term, we would be screwed because we eventually burn all bridges and all trust in the athlete community. So I think it's interesting. I'm following it more with other publishers and stuff because I'm just very curious in general. But from a purely creative standpoint, not too much has changed. If you're an athlete and you have a story to tell and you want to tell it with us, and it's unique and can impact people, we've always been for years, you know, completely open to that and to having the discussion. So not too much.
On the commercial side, like Sean said, we need to be careful as well, right? First of all, we need to have credibility in that space first. Right? We need to have credibility. We need to have college athlete stories. We need to cover college sports through Fansided and our other brands to have some kind of authenticity when we're telling the commercial storytelling part of it. If not, it just seems unauthentic and just trying to capitalize on the opportunity, even though obviously the payment side of things benefits the athlete, but it has to be done in a genuine, in a correct way. So like Sean said, we're being patient also on the commercial fronts.
All right. So we're going to ask you both, what advice would you leave for students or young professionals trying to break into this industry? And we'll end from there.
Yeah. Oof. It was a long time since I broke in. Look, I was very insistent, and I was very willing to do pretty much anything to enter the sports industry. But it was a different time back then. I think the sports industry and especially the young professionals are much better prepared than I was back in the time. What I would say, and going back to the common thread here and common topic, is patience. I will say it's patience. You know, we have teams of both of us, Sean and I, of young professionals, and young professionals have just, different expectations that maybe we did back in the day. It's about rapid growth, dynamic environment. Every day is different. What are they getting out of the experience? And sometimes I see in that youth that sometimes they jump the gun a little bit, or a little bit too anxious for change, and being patient and waiting for the right time when they enter and as they grow will probably result in more growth in the long run. So I would say, yes, patience.
My advice to students, especially in this day and age, is probably to not compare yourself to the sports media sphere on social media, that is I think can be a little bit, it's great, right? I'm not, I don't mean to be negative about it, but I think what I mean is when you're young, now it's so in your face, right? People are sort of constantly promoting their work and people are supporting that work, which is great, right? But I see in young people this kind of, jealousy, right? Professional jealousy, or just, hunger to be this person or that person, right? And I think it can make people lose their way a bit. And I think that's probably social media across the board, right? That's a bit of the poison that comes with the great things in social media across the board, right? I think what I would remember if I was them, I'm old enough now that, I've been doing this in this industry for like 11 or 12 years now. And I've had work that I've done that I was really proud of. It is now wiped from the internet. You can't find it. The company is gone. The website changed over, the whatever, right? And it's interesting because the first time that happens to you, you are furious and you're like, oh my God, my life's work, it's been what, and it's funny now realizing how ephemeral this all is, that everything eventually goes away, right? That what seems important on Twitter today will be wiped, right? It's an interesting exercise, I think, for young people, because I think what you have to always be thinking about is what I'm doing or working on, is there something that people will be able to hold on to for a long time and remember? And I think we read a lot of things now, and by the next day, I couldn't really even tell you what it was about. It was maybe a little entertaining. But then there's things that you'll read or watch or whatever, where years later, you're remembering that. It makes an impact on you in some way. And for me, I think if that's the goal as a creator, then I think you're going to have a more fulfilling life than if you're just constantly chasing the dopamine hit of kind of like winning Twitter that week or that day or whatever. Because eventually it's all going to be wiped away. The website will go through a revamp and all your old articles will be lost, or YouTube will take down your video that you did for some reason. And, I think, what Andre said, patience, but also reminding yourself that if you're lucky enough to be in this industry, it's a dream, right? It's a pleasure. We, as the athletes often say, and it's come up before, often they have to remind themselves that they're playing a child's game for money, right? And, that can actually be helpful, right? In reducing stress and anxiety when it comes to this stuff. And I think it's the same thing as a creator. It's a pleasure to do this. It's a pleasure to try to tell these stories. Many of them will be wiped away by time. Hopefully, if you can work on one or two things that will actually be remembered, it's a great legacy to have, I think.
Join us next episode to speak with Garrett Oots, a Special Olympics athlete, and Lonnie Schneider, CIO of the Special Olympics 2022 USA Games in Orlando, Florida.